It looks like it'll be nip and tuck for the opening first laps for the Ferraris.
Q3, and it looked nip and tuck for Alex for a while that he might make it up into Q3. Just nip and tuck to making the progression, but today just a little bit off it. That's the difference between making it through the Q2 and taking an early bath.
Yeah, sure.
You're likely to get a very different order coming out of it. It is nip and tuck between those RBs.
Formula One is back with a whimper. But not to worry, F1, I still love you. I'm going to break down everything that went down during and around, mostly around, this Bahrain Grand Prix and explain why all hope is not lost for F1. I'm Lockie, let's get locked in. First, I must acknowledge that preseason testing happened. In case we forgot that the object of this whole thing is actually to see which team can build the fastest car, and for drivers to race said cars. It's easy to forget at the moment. I'll try and talk about some things that actually happened on track, but later. Heading to Bahrain, one Christian Horner had a lot hanging over his head, didn't he? Check out my off-season breakdown if you need a refresher. It's only 50 minutes. But Christian Horner had been under investigation by parent company Red Bull GmbH for weeks by the time teams rocked up to Bahrain for alleged inappropriate conduct. Right on time though, before cars hit the track on Thursday, Red Bull GmbH cleared Christian of any wrongdoing. Or not cleared of wrongdoing per se. In fact, their exact words were that the grievance had been dismissed. So they did leave room for Christian to have griefed. The details of the investigation's report were not publicized even a little bit, due to privacy. Still, it was mission accomplished from the Horner camp, with Christian saying that he was just pleased the process is over and that the team has never been stronger. And everyone immediately accepted this result as satisfactory, and that was the end of that. Shh, Toto. Shh, look at the cars. FP1 happened. Of course, being an unrepresentative session, not much could be concluded from what we saw, apart from that Daniel Ricciardo is going to win the 2024 World Championship. These were good times. The innocent times. Max Verstappen wasn't happy at all. RB and McLaren were on top, and it at least looked possible that the rest of the pack had somewhat caught up to Red Bull, apart from Alpine, who looked to have absolutely shat the bed over the break. Already in FP1, word was that they were dead last. Well, after an hour of watching F1 cars, we all decided that it was actually pretty boring. Lucky for us, mid-FP2, the most unhinged thing since Oscar Piastri was announced for Alpine happened. Someone emailed almost all senior members of the paddock a Google Drive containing alleged evidence in the investigation against Christian Horner. Naturally, this sent everyone into a full-blown meltdown. Now, no one has, as of yet, come out swinging with confirmation that the evidence is legit or of who it came from, but for those who've seen it, it's out there. I won't link to it here. It's quite convincing. There are images and video in there that can be confirmed to be previously unreleased private images of Christian, as they weren't public before, but obviously they could have come from a different private source. And the text conversations themselves would be extraordinarily hard to fake. This ain't the work of your regular neighborhood catfish. It's full of the kind of mundane and specific details that are almost impossible to make up. Not that it isn't possible, but personally I've been surprised at just how many F1 fans online have written this off as AI-generated images and fake messages. The images and video, I can say with over 99% confidence, are not possible with the current AI technology. Most commentators and the media are justifiably cautious in their coverage of the leak. This point is particularly important, that it's not just Horner's private information. In all possibility and even likelihood, given the careless doxing of the woman involved, this was not released with her consent. But in being cautious, the media and commentators have been reluctant to take a position on how likely it is that this evidence is real, and I happen to think that it is. And assuming it is, it's truly disgusting stuff that Christian Horner should be absolutely ashamed of and should have lost his job over. If this evidence was indeed available to the independent investigation, which is unclear. And a lesson to many of the men I've seen weighing in on the messages on Reddit. Whether the relationship was initiated consensually is a moot point. You can't have consent between a boss and their employee, given how much power the boss holds over the employee's career and livelihood, let alone the fact that so many of the alleged messages indicate that Christian several times overstepped established boundaries. Now, the leaker's hands are not clean. If this was indeed leaked without the consent of the accuser, then someone has grossly violated her privacy for the sake of their own agenda. But what's done is done. This is out there. And if it's real, Christian should not be Red Bull Racing team principal and CEO, but I'm afraid we might never know. Moving swiftly along. Yeah, that was only Thursday. On to Friday for qualifying. And as it was to be this weekend, the most exciting session on track. Finally, some good stories in F1, motivated by the actual sport of it all. Despite the familiar Max Verstappen pole, there's a magic to the first qualifying of the season. The first time we really get to see where each car's pace is. Bahrain quali delivered on that for me. With stable regulations, expectations were that we'd see no significant change in the pecking order from last year, but I'd argue that Alpine being rock bottom on pace and Hülkenberg and the Haas being able to make Q3 are huge surprises considering where each team was at by the end of 2023. Sure, much of the rest of the field is where we expected, but the margin is closer than ever, as the commentators refuse to let us forget 1 second separated everyone in Q1. This being the track where testing was held too contributes to all the drivers and teams being as dialed in as they'll ever be anywhere this season. The cars being so close will increase the chances of cars ending up out of position in qualifying over the season, and mixed up grids are a key ingredient of great races, of course. Yes, I'm absolutely huffing copium, but I do believe that this bodes well for us. At the pointy end, Ferrari seemed to have taken a step closer to Red Bull, and it was memed into oblivion that Charles's Q2 time was good enough for pole. The Ferraris could challenge for pole on occasion last year, but the hope was for a more raceable car this year. The final starting order we ended up with had some surprises. There was Russell sticking in at P3 ahead of Lewis in P9, seemingly due to Lewis taking a different direction with his setup as he sometimes does. Alonso managed P6 like the absolute legend he is in an Aston that definitely isn't as competitive as it was this time last year. Tsunoda missed out on Q3 by 0.007 of a second and outqualified Ricciardo, which made me very sad. Danny, I hope you really convincingly beat him the rest of the season. It wasn't the most shaken up order or dramatic session, but I wanted to see everyone get their clean laps in to see what everyone genuinely had, and yeah, that set us up for disappointment come Saturday night. So, the race itself. It somehow became the elephant in the room of a weekend in which the team principal of the championship winning team had his alleged lack of riz put on display for all. Yes, it didn't deliver. Yes, Max Verstappen has now won another 8 races in a row, and in the kind of dominant fashion that says it's going to continue like this for some time. But to be absolutely fair, the first 15 to 20 laps had some good on-track action, behind Max of course. At the start, Hülkenberg punted Stroll, Perez got past Sainz, and then Russell sent a sensational around the outside move on Leclerc, who was almost immediately struggling with the braking problem that had him locking up everywhere and getting swallowed up. Alonso well and truly proved he had outdone the car in quali as he was getting eaten up by the McLarens and shortly after by Hamilton as well. Verstappen had vanished, but the battle for P2 looked wide open for a good while. Russell, Leclerc, Perez, and Sainz were all super close on track, but Leclerc's issue made him a bit of a bottle stop. Perez gets past after Leclerc locks up again, setting up a classic Charles v Carlos clash. Sargent had us all fooled for a second that we might see a safety car, but no, he got going again. I was tempted to make fun of him, but he was in then to replace his steering wheel, so it wasn't all his fault. He survives this round. Right as he gets going, Sainz sends one on Leclerc, and as usual, they got so close. I mean, there was barely anything between them, and Leclerc actually had his front wing in the space between Sainz's front and rear left wheels. And as they go through turn 1, Leclerc kind of steers out at the last moment to avoid his front right hitting Sainz's rear left. Stunning precision between these two as always, making Ferrari fans sweat. From there, lap 11 now, the timing tree looked pretty good. Perez was right on the back of Russell, and now Sainz was free to go after Perez. Then, the pit stops hit. Besides further back, Leclerc and Russell blinked first. Then it was Perez and the rest bar Verstappen followed. It was another questionable call from Ferrari to pit Leclerc first and leave Sainz to go on longer because they undercut Sainz with Leclerc. But luckily that gave us the best moment of the race. Sainz's sensational late lunge on Leclerc. I was watching the F1 TV coverage, as I've decided I will for the whole season, and you can tell it was amazing because they were not ready for it at all. To be fair, Leclerc was managing the issue that he had all race, but still a good sign that the Ferrari inspires confidence, at least when it's working properly. Yeah, Max was gone, but the race was still good up to this point. It hadn't completely shaken out up front. I still had faith considering how much of a charge Sainz seemed to be on that he'd get Russell and Perez. So sure enough, as Max comes out of the pits with no cars in sight, Sainz goes after Russell, who probably defended too hard and compromised himself into turn 1, which then allowed Sainz to take huge speed through the corner and take the battle through to turn 4 and get it done. Unfortunately, Sainz just didn't have the pace for Perez, and that may as well have been the end of the race, as happens sometimes. Many laps later, Bottas has a trademark bottled pit stop, traditions. It must be absolutely awful being part of the pit crew. You can see a bunch of them waving around like mad, trying to pick the car back up again to change the front left after the car was already dropped. Someone runs the wheel nut back. Another guy runs and brings back another tire. You hate to see it. The second round of pit stops sets up basically the only other thing to happen in the race, but it's a doozy and a narrative I'm excited to see play out over the rest of the season. So, right back down to RB then, and Tsunoda, who was having a solid race, running around P10 to P11. RB leave him out a bit too long. He pits and comes out in a Haas sandwich behind Hulk ahead of Magnussen. A lap later, Ricciardo pits on a different strategy, onto the softs for the last stint ahead of the hards. Everyone bar the Red Bulls went on for the last stint. Magnussen gets past Tsunoda around the same time, leaving Tsunoda around 10 seconds up the road from Ricciardo, who closes the gap on the better tires over the next 15 laps. Meantime, even in his stricken Ferrari, Leclerc's able to pressure Russell into running wide at turn 10, as so many drivers did all race, which kind of robbed us of a better battle, but oh well. Fourth for Leclerc. Now how's Ricciardo going? Well, 5 laps to go and he's all over Tsunoda, but Tsunoda's also all over K-Mag, whose tires are older and on a Haas. The call comes over the radio. Yuki is not happy. He takes 2 whole laps to comply, but Ricciardo's softs are done then and he doesn't get Magnussen. 57 laps, Verstappen wins. But it's not over for Yuki. Here's what happens next. Yeah. So he decides to vent his frustrations by dive bombing on Ricciardo on the cooldown lap. Now, I'm usually a Yuki sympathizer, but this was so unhinged from him. Not only is his reaction here way out of proportion and immature, but I think the most concerning thing is that he should know it makes no sense to take it out on Ricciardo. It shows a lack of race awareness that if I were him, I would be embarrassed to have shown. He didn't back down after the race. There was no apology. I think RB screwed his strategy a bit. They should have pit Tsunoda a bit earlier so he didn't get undercut, and I think his stop may have been a bit slow too, but I don't think the call to swap the drivers was awful, despite what Yuki said. I don't think he was about to overtake Magnussen himself. The pace differential wasn't big enough. Ricciardo's pace would have been good enough to make the move if Yuki obeyed the order right away, but I get the other side of it too. Points were never on the cards, so it mightn't have been worth the friction. There shouldn't have been any reaction from Yuki towards Ricciardo. It just makes him look dumb, especially next to Ricciardo, who, apart from calling Yuki a helmet, kept it professional during his post-race interviews. I think there might be a little bit more in it from Yuki's side. He knows he's battling Ricciardo for the Red Bull seat, assuming Red Bull don't just stick with Perez, who delivered the 1-2, so maybe they will. But Yuki's also been driving at the Red Bull B team for way too long, and maybe he knows that already. Ricciardo comes along with a long career, popular guy, and Yuki knows that Red Bull, and especially Christian, deep down want Ricciardo to be good enough for the Red Bull seat. Honda's out for 2026. There goes the reason to keep Yuki, unless he beats Ricciardo so convincingly they can't be ignored. He's feeling the heat for an already hot-headed guy. Problem is, there's so much talent out there, and no team's gonna want to deal with Yuki's bullshit. So I hope he pulls his head in, but this is a story I'll be watching real closely this season. The off-track spectacle definitely overshadowed the on-track action this weekend, and it didn't stop there. The dad everyone wishes they had, Jos Verstappen, came out guns blazing against Christian Horner after the race, saying there's tension here while he remains in position. The team is in danger of being torn apart. It can't go on the way it is. It will explode. He is playing the victim when he's the one causing the problems. I mean, god damn. We know how important to Max's decisions and how big a role in the team Jos plays, so this is just crazy. He was also seen on video arguing with Horner in the paddock. Max himself refused to fully back Horner. He only vouched for his leadership from the performance side of things. In another ludicrous twist, after the race, Jos Verstappen was pictured talking to Toto Wolff. The next day, rumors of conversations between Max's camp and Mercedes ran absolutely rampant after reputable German F1 publication AMUS reported that Max to Mercedes was on the cards for next year. Now, I don't think this will actually happen. He's denied it, but I wouldn't rule out Jos being involved more directly in the reported Red Bull power struggle, in which case he could be maneuvering to signal to Red Bull's parent company that with Horny at the helm, they may risk losing Max. Now, many are decrying this situation as totally embarrassing and the worst of F1, but here's where I have to stick my neck out for F1 a bit and talk a bit about why I still love it, and despite what we saw on track this weekend, I'm still excited for F1 for the rest of this year. I mean, I did start a YouTube channel to cover it after all. The thing about current day F1, despite this period of intense Max domination, as this Horner situation, Hamilton to Ferrari, the fact that we're even talking about the possibility of Max to Mercedes shows that everything is balanced on a knife's edge. It could all change in an instant. Even when the situation remains relatively static for a while, as it has since mid-2022 really, You couldn't have predicted then all the things that have happened since. And we know what we're watching. We're watching Formula One, where the teams compete to build the fastest car. Sometimes, lots of the time really, the winning team does that by a margin. Front to back though, the cars are closer than they've ever been. There's a baked-in advantage that the top teams had from the pre-budget cap era that will take time to erode, but we can see it happen. Yes, there are spec or BOP series where unpredictability rules and we never know what's going to happen and the racing is closer, but F1 is about being patient for the paradigm shifts, the moments that change everything. F1 has never been purely about the action on track. It's always been about the narrative over the course of a year or many years, tension building and building until it breaks spectacularly. And as for the accusations that F1 is suddenly all drama, no sport, I mean, it's always been this way. It's always been partly about rich people looking silly and the over-the-top outlandishness of it all. There are people who watch racing purely for the action on track, and there are far better series to watch for that. Watching and enjoying an F1 season, races, and series of seasons is about the narrative, the push and pull of development, the driver changes, team personnel changing, and all that backstory is what makes the spectacular battles more significant. It's like scoring in football. By the time something happens, the emotion is so intense and it's addictive. You can't get a rush like that when every race is wide open. And for what it's worth, the racing on any given regular old weekend is about as good as it's ever been. I'm sorry, it's just true. The gaps from the top to the bottom have never been smaller. The cars were probably more raceable from 2011 to 2016 than 2022 to now. The cars are still way more raceable than 2017 to 2021. Like, yeah, that's vibes, but just go back and watch a 2017 race. Also, the pecking order is able to change more quickly and changes a bunch throughout the season from track to track. We aren't highlighting that enough because Red Bull has been untouchable everywhere, but look where Aston started 2023 and look where they ended it. Even more stark was the difference between McLaren at the start and end of the year. With the cars so close, finding a 10th is worth multiple places at the end of the race. And in regular cycles, the team's advantages are completely reset with regulations changes. In 2026, F1 will look completely different to today. I mean, imagine what F1 could look like in 10 or 20 years. Personally, I think fan cars will take the sport to the next level at some point in that time frame, so putting my prediction in for that already. There's just so much about F1 that's exciting and makes it more compelling to someone like me than someone who likes something like IndyCar. And we can each have our preferences, but I'm sick of people projecting their preferences onto F1 when that's just not what it's about. And hey, there will be banger races this year, as there were even last year. Granted, there weren't many, but we shouldn't get so reactionary and hung up now, because F1, more than any other sport, changes so fast. It's a living, breathing game. There will be better times, there will be worse. You either get it or you don't. If you don't, just don't watch. Anyway, rant over. I just think the reaction from some fans after this race was way over the top. I still love F1 and I don't think the sport is in as much trouble as it's being made out to be. This period will just be another in the history of F1, summed up in a sentence in 20 years' time. Like we talk of the Vettel years, the Hamilton years even now, the Schumacher years. They're eras of dominance, each punctuated by golden years of competition. It won't feel so long and boring in retrospect. Anyway, I'm Lockie. You've been locked in. See you next time for Jeddah, which has totally not already happened. And like if you liked, subscribe if you want, and chuck us a comment. Let's have a chat. See ya.